I think that we need something outside of the Democratic Party. I think we need a viable alternative outside of the Democratic Party. I understand people like you who are running now. It's pretty much, in a lot of ways, the only option you got. I get that. But I think in the big scheme of things, we need to have a viable alternative outside of the Democratic Party. That is also a very tall glass of water.
Yeah. Okay. So I can give you a couple of things there, both on a personal level and as a historian. On the personal level, I totally get that. I have, since 92, hopped into the Democratic Party for every primary and then stepped back out of it. I didn't like associating myself with either of the major parties because, in general, they've not really done much to support our interests per se. I've tended to be an independent or a green even.
Okay.
I only committed to staying in the party with the 2016 run and these calls to DemEnter and actually making a difference there. It honestly didn't make a difference, though, what party I was in or what I did, because I'm in California. And since 92, there's been no chance of California doing anything but go for the Democrats anyway. So my vote never mattered per se. My party didn't matter. But it was always just a protest. And that's literally all it can be. And that gets to the historical part. Third parties cannot work in the United States. A third party can replace one of the major parties, which, for example, the Republicans did to the Whig Party. But you can't run three parties at a time. We would have to be able to destroy the Democratic Party to run an alternative there. And I don't see an easy way to do that. You'd have an easier time. I mean, ultimately, the leadership in the parties, all the big organizations, it's based upon current and past elected officials, which means that there's an opportunity, at least if you put enough people, to gradually take control of those levers of power and direct it in the right way, to viably replace it and to get enough people to change over to it. I mean, first off, you're asking for decades of a lock on power on the Republican Party as you shift people over to the new one, in the same way that, like, again, the Whig Party became completely irrelevant, long before it ceased to exist, before the Republican Party could rise in its place. And then you're also saying we would need a huge amount of money to pull that thing off.
That's true.
It's simply this. It's just easier to do in this sense here. And again, three parties it doesn't work for legal reasons. For the way that we have written electoral laws across this country and at the federal level, it was designed originally for no parties at all, so they weren't thinking about it. And the way they wrote it said that only two could effectively compete. So coming from the outside, we're kind of screwed.
Well, I mean, then it's dire in either scenario, because you're also trying to enter a building that really doesn't want you in it, that has spent millions of dollars to keep you out of it.
I'm aware. It's difficult either way, but the one has a chance of succeeding if enough of us get behind it, and the other simply doesn't.
Also does. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think it's fair to say one or the other has zero chance. I just don't, because you bring up the Republicans and the Whigs. I mean, that actually wasn't. I mean, it was about like a 6-year cycle to where that really happened, and the Whigs became obsolete and the Republicans took their place. It takes a while for history to repeat itself in the United States, but I think eventually it does.
A good bit longer than that. I mean, they were in decline for quite a long time, losing more and more power in the Congress. I mean,
what's happening to the Democrats? Don't you see the same thing happening to the Democrats?
No, what I see is they've surrendered to the Republican Party in many areas. We went from 3/4 of state houses to 1/3 of them. I mean, we're losing ground in tons of areas.
Right.
But there's no movement actually away from it. There's simply people checking out of the political process and staying outside of it, trying to reactivate people like that and find things that would appeal to enough of them. I mean, the Greens are certainly not going to pull that off. And I sure as hell hope the Libertarians aren't going to pull that off.
Okay.
I mean, there's not enough support for any of them. I mean, I don't know. What have we seen from any of the third parties? Have they really improved on anything? I mean, Nader did better than some of the Green candidates, but it was still like just a minuscule number. And there's literally no Green candidates in Congress. There's no one even with a chance of running right now because of the current, again, the current legal and institutional structures. I don't see any movement toward it that would make it viable. What happens is that if we pin hopes on that and focus on it, what it does is it makes us irrelevant. And that's the movement you're talking about from the current Democratic Party, because what they do is they can focus in on what they have left. If they know you're going to be outside of it, if they know you're going to be a green or whatever, vote green, something like that, then they can safely ignore your concerns and pander only to the voters that they have left. That's why we've shrunk in terms of. They
already do that. How are they not already doing that, Liam? How is that not already happening?
No, that's. I think you're following what I'm getting at here. That is.
I think I am.
They're only going to follow that base there and chase it. It's all they've ever going to do. When there were more of us in and pushing on it, they had to pay more attention to broader issues. So think about the decline from the New Deal consensus that we had. If you look at Democratic politics in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I mean, when they started shifting away from that in the 1970s and started pushing out a lot more of that basic working class influence, we started to lose more faith and hope from it and started dropping away. And they continued to focus only on what they had. There was no lesson. I mean, in the declines there, I mean, honestly, the Reagan Democrats should have been a lesson, but they're not interested in that lesson. The fact that so many working class union people chose to vote Republican then and continue to vote Republican, and we've lost so much ground there. If it should have been a wake-up call to them if they actually cared about those issues. They honestly don't. They're going to keep pandering to the smaller base that they have. So you're right. That is actually the problem.
So it's all right. I mean, yeah. And I think this is just where we can agree to disagree. I mean, we can keep going around in circles if you want to, but I would argue what you're describing to me is the same decline that happened historically the Democrats are on the decline. Young people have no sense of allegiance to that party. They're mostly indifferent. More Americans identify as independents than ever before. Over half the country doesn't vote. The Democrats have been losing in droves. I mean, if now is the time where history is going to repeat itself, this is it. And when you have an infrastructure that still has those donor dollars and isn't interested in changing at all, they have made it abundantly clear they are not interested in changing.
Right.
You got to try to beat them. You got to try to beat them. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do what you're doing now. What you're doing now is pretty much the only lane available to you. But, you know, I think the status quo definitely needs to shift. And it's not impossible. I mean, you say, oh, well, it's set up for two parties. That's all it'll ever be. No, we can change that. Something like ranked choice voting would evolve that conversation. The Constitution was meant to be an evolving document. Maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't base all of our ideology and all of the options of what is possible on a bunch of founding fathers who owned slaves and solved some of their conflicts by walking 10 feet and then shooting guns at each other. Maybe we should evolve a little further than that.
I don't disagree at all with you there, but think about how difficult it is actually to push through the amendments. I mean, to change the voting system at the federal level would require a majority of the states to sign on. And the ones under Republican control are not going to do it. It's the same with all the arguments for abolish the Electoral College. We should never have had it. It should never have been tolerable.
I agree.
You know, it was explicitly designed actually to maintain elite control and to be able to subvert the voters' will. And today it's just simply a tool of the partisan elite. But to abolish it requires getting most of the states on board. And what we have to do is we have to win people over on the state level. And that's going to require a lot of engagement in those red states and more people talking to each other. And what's been happening is quite the opposite. People are becoming more polarized and tribal and not talking, which means that you're leaving the Republican rhetoric to make their arguments to their voters, and you're never going to get the win in the states that you would need to ratify it. There's tons of things that we've done like that, trying to attempt, really good changes to the Constitution that were done, passed in like the 60s, 70s, and whatnot, that never went anywhere. I mean, we couldn't even pass an equal rights amendment, for crying out loud. I mean, until we actually can really win the arguments in a lot of those red areas, a lot of those kind of changes get difficult. On the state level, however, we can make changes, but again, it involves that kind of argument. Enough states would have to make the changes. And if only blue states make those changes to ranked choice, it gives the advantage to the Republicans. We have to win the arguments in their states as well. So the main argument I'm making really is not that it's impossible. Certainly any party could disappear and be replaced. But there's a lot of things that are different now from the 19th century. For one thing, massive consolidation in the media and corruption on a level that actually exceeds the 19th century when you can literally hand cash to representatives for their votes. I mean, things are actually dirtier now. And with that much money pouring in to maintain it, the idea that a viable alternative could show up and actually overcome the media barrier. When you've got like 5 corporations that control 85% of what you see, you're not going to get airtime. I mean, hell, Bernie was running as a Democrat. How much airtime did he get relative to anybody else?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And if we can't get over that barrier, how do we realistically build up an alternative? It's not impossible. It's just there's so many things stacked against it. And in order to do anything like this, for me, it's a matter of like trying to figure out what would need to be accomplished first. What can we do to make that possible?
Well, I think historically you need a mass movement that has some type of cooperation. I would argue that's something that we had in the 20s and 30s. I would argue that's one of the reasons we got a New Deal. We didn't get a New Deal because FDR just felt like being a nice guy. I mean, you know that. He wasn't just like, New Deal. I feel like you like this. He had the foresight to realize, look at all these people out there. They're fed up. They're not going to take it anymore. Guess what, rich friends? You're either going to give up a little bit or you're going to give up all of it. Make up your freaking mind.
Yeah, exactly. And he had the foresight is the key there. And it did involve a change from within that said, like, we need to focus on pragmatic solutions and actually address these problems rather than.
It wasn't a pragmatic solution, though. It wasn't a pragmatic solution. It was a sharp solution. It was pragmatic in the sense that it met the moment.
That's like, it's pragmatic in the sense of like, and it bugs me that people are like, oh, FDR was a socialist. No, the whole point of FDR was that he defanged the socialist movement in the U.S. by trying to meet people halfway. So he tried to like help everybody out. So it's basically like, and pragmatic in the sense of like, they didn't really know how to fix a lot of the problems. They were just wanting to keep throwing darts at the wall until one of them hit the target. And then, okay, cool, do that. Like the experimental aspect of it. The fact that they brought in tons of experts from outside the major fields and outside the major, the elite institutions. Look at the way that Ivy League colleges have dominated the interior of the party under Obama. And then look at the fact that Harry Truman didn't even have a college degree. I mean, they turned to different people and they looked for outsider ideas. They looked for out-of-the-box solutions, shall we say. And we don't really have something comparable like that in a presidential candidate. Bernie was the closest we had there. I'm just saying, though, right, in this election, we certainly don't. Both of them are status quo candidates.
Right. Well, I agree with everything you just said there. And I think that another big problem and this is like another bigger picture thing, is that what you just described used to be smiled upon in this country. It is now very much frowned upon. Outsider ideas are very much frowned upon. Different perspectives are very much frowned upon. The creative class is the opposite of politics. I mean, you as an academic, you are the opposite of the contemporary political world. I as a comedian, I am the opposite of the contemporary political world. They like to use what we have to offer when it helps them. But as far as really giving us a seat at the table,
right,
they don't want to do that. And, right. Liam, I mean, you and I have some differences strategically, but principally we're on the same page. Mm-hmm. If you win, it will be an accident. It will be an accident on the part of the establishment. And that's a compliment. They don't want you to win.
Exactly. And they're going to push back hard against every one of them. Every single one of those squad victories in the blue seats, and everyone like, like myself or Kara Eastman or whatever that are running close are actually, an accident. I mean, they will dump millions of dollars into a seat where they have far worse demography and a far worse chance of winning because the candidate they have is someone who wants to play ball with them. They're not going to support people who fundamentally want to shake up the system and start working for the American people again. There's a reason that Congress usually has an approval rating of 15%. It doesn't work for us anymore. You know, I honestly, I mean, it'll be a joke move, but I will honestly propose that we force people in Congress to wear NASCAR jackets. I mean,
saying they're donors.
Their owners are
saying they're donors. Yeah,
it's not us. And
that's an old bit from a stand-up. I forget who did it first. I think Mitch Hedberg had a joke like it, and then someone like put it into politics or something like that.
I heard it decades ago, so probably very much from a comedian. I couldn't remember who. But,
yeah, no, it was somebody, but
it's just, they fundamentally do not represent us. They represent the moneyed interests that put them into power in the first place. And yes, it will be an accident or a miscalculation on their part when candidates like this get through. But if enough of them do, we have an opportunity to change the conversation. I mean, if you get enough people, if you get enough squad type people, if you get enough clean money candidates into the House, then you can force a lot of the remaining ones, a lot of the remaining Democrats to come on board with banning lobbying. Right now, they have zero incentive ever to do it. If they see the writing on the wall and that they can lose their spots to somebody else, then more of them will come on board and we can actually get significant changes through. If we can change the lobbying issue, then everything else gets to be easier. Then it gets back to a conversation just on the issues and on the right rhetoric for how do we actually serve the American people. Until we can ban cash lobbying, we're not going to get fundamental change in this country. We're not going to address the real issues. It has to be enough of these insurgent candidates that get through to tip the balance of power.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your